Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratise Namah He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jayatam Surutau Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarva Swapadam Bojo Radha Madana Mohano Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpadrumadha Shrimandratranagar Singhasanasto Shrimad Radha Srila Govinda Devo Prishtalibhi Sevyamano Smarami Shrimandra Sarasarambhi Vamshivata Tatakstitaha Karshana Venusunair Gopir Gopinata Shriyestunaha Bhaktya Vihina Aparadha Lakshay Kshiptascha Kamari Taranga Madhye Kripa Maitvam Sharanam Prapanna Brinde Namaste Charanarvindam Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhaktarupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Gurudev, Nitya Lila Pravishta, Om Vishnu Pad, Paramahansa, Ashto Tarashata, Sri Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada. Then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipable beloved Siksha Gurudevs. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Ashto Tarashata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj. And Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Ashto Tarashata Sri Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to all of my Shri Shri Rupanuga Gauriya Guru Varga. And my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. And my Dandavat pranams to Srila Rupa Goswami, the author of Sri Upadeshamrita, to Srila Sachidananda Bhaktivedanta Thakur, whose extensive commentary on the second and third shlokas of Sri Upadeshamrita we are studying. So we just had a little bit to complete. At the end of the 6 chapters, one chapter for each of the unfavorable activities to bhakti. And the final one being Lolyam. So we didn't quite complete that. And that's very short. We'll complete that and then we'll move on to the second half of the book, which talks about the third shloka, Utsaha Nishchayat Dhairyat, where the 6 favorable qualities for bhakti are elucidated.
Didn't Gurudev say that that third verse automatically accomplishes the first 2? Something to that effect?
I haven't heard that directly, but that sounds okay.
I thought I heard it.
The third verse automatically accomplishes the other. Yeah, why not? Because the third verse is talking about performing bhakti, right? Yeah, it's talking about the 6 necessary, very, very essential qualities and activities that one has to do to enhance one's bhakti. And we've just been reading that if bhakti is there, automatically senses, mind, intelligence will be controlled, and all of the first and second verses, they'll definitely be accomplished. I can see how that's a fact. Yeah.
I remember hearing it, but I can't place the time and location.
Sure. Well, it's something like Gurudev also told that don't think that by trying to give up your anarthas that you will be successful. He said not lacks of lifetimes. If you just try to give up your anarthas, you cannot do that. But just focus on bhakti, then automatically the anarthas will go. So we're completing this last. Remember how we read yesterday about the desire for sense gratification. This little short paragraph. The desire for sense gratification is of 2 types. Worldly and heavenly. Remember? Worldly is aihika and heavenly is paratrika. Desire for sense gratification. One's wife, children, wealth, kingdom, success, palatable foods, sleep, sexual intimacy, honor, and so on. These are all worldly sense objects known as aihika bhoga, of this world. Aihika, ordinary sensual gratification. All worldly sense objects. So residents in the heavenly planets, the nectarous beverages available in such planets, sense gratification fit for demigods, and other heavenly delights. They are known as paratrika bhoga. So as long as these two types of desires for enjoyment remain in the heart, a sadhak cannot selflessly perform Krishna bhajan. Therefore, desires for sense gratification should be completely uprooted and thrown from the heart. Otherwise, obstacles will appear in one's practice of bhakti. So very clear, isn't it? We cannot argue that there's some other loophole for this, right? No. As long as these two types of desires for enjoyment remain in the heart, a sadhaka cannot selflessly perform Krishna bhajan. Why not? Because he's always thinking about his own self. How you can be selfless if you're always thinking about your own self and your own sense gratification. That's quite the opposite of bhakti. So as long as these two types of desires are there, enjoyment remains in the heart, and a sadhaka cannot selflessly perform Krishna bhajan. So therefore, desires for sense gratification should be completely uprooted, not partially, should be completely uprooted and thrown from the heart. Otherwise, obstacles will appear in one's practice of bhakti. So we should know that if obstacles are there in our practice of bhakti, our attempt to practice, we should know that these desires for sense gratification have not been completely uprooted and thrown from the heart. So, moving on to the next section, which is called appropriate renunciation. What's the word in Sanskrit for appropriate renunciation? Yukta, vairagya. Yes. The matter to be considered here is that the above-mentioned objects of enjoyment, they can be accepted by householders in a non-sinful manner, only if those objects are favorable for bhakti. So what objects? Well, we just heard of. Wife, children, wealth, reputation, all of those objects. They can be accepted by householders only if those objects are favorable for bhakti. In that case, they cannot be called objects of enjoyment. We don't call them objects of enjoyment, vishaya. Rather, they are a sadhaka's livelihood. The sadhaka is living his livelihood. What did Bhaktivedanta Thakur call that? Krishna samsar. Remember in that song? Krishna samsar koro chari anachar. Krishna samsar koro. Make your life Krishna's samsar, not yours. This is Krishna's house. These objects are Krishna's. So, such a householder can make his life so favorable, even accepting all of those objects, But in that case, if he's doing this, then those objects, they cannot be called the objects of enjoyment. Why? Because, yes, he's only accepting these objects for the service of the Lord. Krishna samsara, it's Krishna's household, Krishna's family, these jivas, everything is Krishna's. So, and they should be considered, they can be called a sadhaka's livelihood. That's all. Because that's the only interest of the sadhak, is to maintain with the basic necessities, keep body and soul together, and do Krishna bhajan. So it's his livelihood. It's not sinful. If those objects are favorable for bhakti, but he can make them favorable for bhakti by dedication. So now he quotes 2 verses from the 1st canto, 2nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're a little bit familiar with these verses. In fact, they have been quoted already, at least one of them. The first one has been quoted already by Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur in some of the previous chapters. So these are 1st canto, 2nd chapter, verses 9 and 10. Dharmasya hiya pavargasya narto artai upakalpate nartasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smritaha kamasya nendriya pritir labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jigyasa narto yascheha karmavi. So here Srila Sutta Goswami, he is explaining that dharma, occupational engagements, dharma. So what is the meaning of dharma? Dharmasya hi apavargasya. All occupational engagements are certainly meant for ultimate liberation. That's what they're meant for. Varnashram dharma, and all of the duties pertaining to the ashramas and varnas. All these occupational engagements are certainly meant for apavargasya. Apavargasya means ultimate liberation. This is actually Srila Prabhupada's direct translation from his Bhagavatam for these 2 verses. So then Sutta Goswami is saying, Dharma siya pavargasya narto artai upakalpate. He says they should never be performed for what? For material gain. Artha. That should not be the motivation, right? The motivation should be for apavargasya, not for the artha, the economic development and sense gratification, material gain. So, nartasya dharmaikantasya, furthermore, according to the sages, one who is engaged in the ultimate occupational service, then he should never use material gain for what? To cultivate sense gratification. Very clear. First thing, your occupational engagement should be for apavarga. I went through that in one of the classes, how Prabhupada explains the word pavarga, pa, like that. So apavarga means the opposite of that. It means liberation. Here it's told, means it's for ultimate liberation. And they should not be performed, dharma should not be performed for the purpose of just material gain. No. Dharma should be performed for what? Ultimate liberation. That's the motivation. And according to the sages, if one is engaged in this ultimate occupational service, then he should never use the material gain to cultivate sense gratification. Like ordinary materialistic persons, what do? Their whole objective is more money and more ability to get sense gratification. But that should not be the motivation or the activity of one who is engaged in the ultimate occupational service. What is that ultimate occupational service? Savai pungsam parodharmo yato bhaktirabhokshite. That verse is coming in this chapter. Yes. So then the second verse that's quoted here, kamasya nindriya priti. What does indriya priti mean?
Enjoying the senses?
Yeah. Indriya means the senses, and priti means giving enjoyment to the senses. That indriya pritaya aprinoti, that's also in the famous Lord Rishabhadev's teachings to his sons. Indriya pritaya aprinoti. He uses that term. So here, kamasya na indriya priti. Kamasya means your desires, life's desires. Life's desires should never be directed toward sense gratification. Kamasya na indriya pritir. Labho jiveta yavata. But one should desire only what? A healthy life, self-preservation. That's all. Healthy life and self-preservation. Why? Why should this be the desire for such a follower of the Dharma? Why? Because jivasya tattva jigyasa. This is such an important line. Jivasya tattva jigyasa. If only the whole world knew this three-word sentence. Jivasya tattva jigyasa. What is the purpose of the life of a human being? Jivasya means the life of the human being. What's it meant for? What's its purpose? Tattva jigyasa. To inquire about the absolute truth. Since a human being is meant for inquiring about the absolute truth, so one should desire only healthy life, self-preservation, so that he can do that, so that he can perform that. The ultimate purpose of the human form of life is to inquire. That's why the human intelligence, I'm sure that we've all used this example in our preaching thousands of times to the ordinary public, right? And Prabhupada did it tens of thousands of times. What is a human being? What's the difference? Like that famous verse about dvipada pashu. That means two-legged animal. What differentiates the human being from animals? We live here with animals, dogs and cats, and we can obviously see they can't relate on that level. It's impossible. Prabhupada emphasizes that so many times in his lectures. They cannot understand. They cannot. Even they're sitting right next to the temple, and they're just on the level of, what is it called? Instinct, right? Or let's just like the example, if you put a dog on a throne and put a king's crown and cape around that dog on the throne, as soon as you throw a bone, it will immediately jump off to get that bone, right? So they're not equipped, okay? And we spent a long, long time waiting, life after life, dog body after cat body, after elephant body, after ant and bee body. And we've gone through all of them. But now, atato brahma jigyasa. Vedanta Sutra is telling now, therefore, atato. It is the time to inquire Jigyasa, to be curious, to know what is the truth. Brahma, absolute truth. Brahma means the absolute truth, from whom everything has come. Because the next line in the Vedanta Sutra says, Janmadyasya yataha. Brahma, atato Brahma jigyasa, Janmadyasya yataha. Janma adi asya. That means he is the origin, the source, the birth. Janma adi. And adi means he is the source, he is the maintainer, and he's the annihilator of the whole creation. This needs to be understood. Prabhupada was commenting in one recent lecture I was hearing how professors or scientists, they're analyzing so many things, but they're analyzing things that are already here. They're not creating anything new. They're just manipulating and analyzing things that are already here. And whatever knowledge they come up with is just knowledge of what's already here. Somehow or other understanding how this chemical mixes with this and that does this. But they have no knowledge of before and after everything that's here. No knowledge of that. Where did you come from? Where did all this come from? Where will it ultimately go? That's knowledge, Prabhupada was saying. This is not knowledge. To just analyze some chemicals and make all kinds of theories. That's all they can do, is theorize. They can put forward theories. That's all that they do, right? And their theories can never be proven. They never do prove it. Big Bang, black hole, this, that. We saw through our microscope, our telescope, we saw. I remember in our Back to Godhead magazine, there was a great illustration one time back in the 70s of a scientist, right? So the scientist is sitting there, on his chair, and he's looking through his microscope, his telescope. And then there's so many bigger. The telescopes are like that. They start small and then big lenses inside of them, right? But problem is, the scientist's eyes are imperfect. You're starting with imperfect senses. So how are you going to get perfect knowledge, even if you have a telescope hundreds of miles long? Which they try to build those kind of things now. I've seen the scientists. But no knowledge can come from this because they will not be able to know the ultimate absolute truth, from which everything comes, by whom everything is being maintained, that they can't even understand how everything's being maintained. The furthest that the ordinary karmi materialistic persons can go in this Western civilization, Christian, pious persons, the furthest they can go is that God is there, we believe in him. That's all the knowledge they have. They have no other knowledge. How did everything come? Where are we going ultimately? They have no knowledge. They're in darkness. But because they have some little faith and they're pious, so Krishna will help them. They'll help that jiva, and gradually they'll be able to come to Vaishnavism in some body, in some future life, whatever. Because of their pious temperament, that's all. Krishna will help. But demoniac, atheistic scientists, scholars, philosophers, they will lose their human form of life. Despite all their scholarship and big titles and PhDs, they'll lose their human form of life because they did not worship. So they get demoted back down into lower species because they didn't use that intelligence for the purpose that it was supposed to be. The purpose it has been given by the Supreme Controller. He gave that to the jivas to now inquire about the absolute truth. So, here Srimad Bhagavatam is saying nothing else except for this, to inquire about the absolute truth. Narto yascheha karma bi. Nothing else should be the goal of all of your karma, of all of your works. All of your works and endeavors, nothing else should be the goal except this. So Bhaktivedanta Thakur is saying, by engaging in religious duties, dharma, as a means to attain material enjoyment, by engaging in religious duties as a means to attain material enjoyment, well, one obtains material wealth, artha, and through such wealth, one obtains sense gratification, kam, and also attains its fruit, sense pleasure in this world, and in the heavenly planets as well. However, when one engages in religious duties aimed at liberation, then the resultant wealth that he obtains, as well as the sense gratification that he attains through such wealth, is always favorable for one inquiring about the absolute truth, tattva jigyasa. This is because, the reason why is it always favorable? Because the fruit of the religious duties, dharma, the religious duties, the fruit of religious duties and wealth, artha, is not sense gratification, but it is the satisfaction of Krishna's desires. Krishna's desires. Because one desires to attain knowledge of the absolute truth. Therefore, his endeavors, all of this, it becomes favorable. Krishna arranges that it all becomes favorable, tattva jigyasa, to become enlightened about absolute tattva. Because the fruit of the religious duties and the wealth is not sense gratification, but is the satisfaction of Krishna's desires. So satisfying these desires of Krishna is known as tattva jigyasa, which is also known as yukta vairagya, appropriate renunciation. Yes. Now, the desire for liberation. This section, it is absolutely essential that the sadhaka completely renounce the desire for moksha, liberation, also. It is essential. Of course, in the beginning, it may not be so, well, possible even. But as one cultivates bhakti, it will be essential to give up. Even we were talking about like the fourth verse of Sikshastakam. Nadanam najanam nasundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamaye mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhakti rahaitu kitvaye. Janmani janmani means birth after birth. This is in the stage we were mentioning, ruchi. When such a level comes to the devotee, ruchi, in that stage, then this verse is pertaining to his moods in that stage. I don't want anything, even liberation. I only want your completely ahoituki, unmotivated, ahoituki bhakti. That's all. Nothing else. So, moksha is of 5 types. We know the 5 types of liberation. What are they?
I forget the Sanskrit.
First one,
Saloka.
salokya. What's that? Loka, planet.
Living on the same planet.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Second one, sarshti. Sarshti.
Opulence.
Yes, to attain, to possess the same opulences as Bhagavan. The third one, samipya, residing very close in bodily contact with the Lord. So not only living on the same planet, possessing the same opulence, also residing very close, having that type of liberation. Number 4, sarupya.
The same form as the Lord.
Yes. Like in Vaikuntha?
Or same?
What do you mean?
Having the same similar form to the Lord.
Well, that's what it says. It says here, possessing the same form as Bhagavan. Just like in Vaikuntha. They all have 4 arms. They look like him.
Yeah.
They're not him. The cowherd boys look like the cowherd boy Krishna. Right? So they have the same bodily form through which they can serve and engage in pastimes with the Lord. Yeah. So then finally, there comes the 5th one, which the 4, they can be accepted by the devotee, but the devotee doesn't desire them. 4. But the 5th form, the 5th type of moksha is called sayujya. And it means to merge into the existence of the Lord. So the devotees, they regard sayujya mukti as greatly contemptible. Yes. Although salokya, sarsti, samipya, and sarupya muktis are free from the desire to enjoy sense objects, they are undesirable. By the strength of bhakti, the living entity obtains liberation and freedom from material, inert objects. By the strength of bhakti. Automatically becomes liberated from, he becomes liberated, he attains that, and also freedom from all inert objects. So liberation, mukti, is but a secondary result of bhakti. It's a secondary result of mukti. The primary goal of sadhana bhakti is the attainment of pure love for Krishna, Krishna prema. This is the primary goal of sadhana bhakti, to attain Krishna prema. So at this point, one cannot conceal one's eagerness to cite the words of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So here, he's quoting from Madhya Lila, chapter 6, verses 267 through 269, about this topic, as Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was telling. Salokyadi chari jadi hoy seva dwara, tabu kadachit bhakta kore angikar, sayujya shunite bhakter hoy grina bhai, naraka vanchai tabu sayujya naloy, brahme ishvara sayujya duhito prakar, brahma sayujya hoite ishvara sayujya dikar. So, the essence of these statements is that by the desire of Bhagavan, devotees effortlessly attain mukti in the form of severing their material relations. That's mukti. To sever, to become severed from the material relations. And it's talking about all, even relation with your body, any identification whatsoever. So, it is the desire of Bhagavan that his devotees will effortlessly attain mukti in the form of severing material relations. It is thus improper to contaminate the endeavor for bhakti with the desire for mukti. That's a contamination. It's contamination. So for this reason, it is a primary duty of the sadhak to be particularly careful to completely give up greed, lalya, that is averse to bhakti. And that completes the first half of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's essays on the 6 unfavorable. Now we move on to the 6 essays by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur on the 6 virtues of a practitioner of bhakti. And this is mentioned in the Upadeshamrita verse 3. This first item is utsaha. So now, first of all, the utsaha means enthusiasm. Utsaha. And the 3rd verse of Sri Upadeshamrita describes 6 subjects. Utsahan nishchayad dhairyat tattat karma pravartanat sangatyagat sato vritte sadbhir bhakti prasidhyati. You know the verse? You can say it all together. Utsaha nishchayat dharyat tattat karma pravartanat sanga tyagat sato vritte sadbhir bhakti prasidhyati. The translation: progress in bhakti may be obtained by the following. Number 1, enthusiasm. Number 2, firm faith. Number 3, fortitude or patience. Number 4, performing the activities of bhakti. Number 5, giving up unfavorable association. We already had that in the other list, Janasanga. And this is called Sanga Tyagat. It means to actually give it up. But there, it's listing that this is unfavorable. Janasanga is unfavorable. And here, to give that up, that's one of the 6 favorable items. So, number 6, adopting the behavior and the character of pure devotees. To adopt their behavior and their character is called sato vritte. So now Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it is essential to deliberate on each of these 6 subjects individually. So therefore we shall first discuss utsaha, enthusiasm. He says, what is utsaha? The activities of bhajan become weak in the absence of enthusiasm. There has to be utsaha, enthusiasm. Otherwise, the activities of bhajan become weak in the absence of enthusiasm. This weakness arises. How does this weakness arise? It arises from inertness, laziness, and indifference. These 3. This weakness, it arises from inertness, laziness, and indifference. Inactivity and laziness, which are known as jadya, means inertia. Jadya. So inactivity and laziness, which is known as jadya, inertia, they are eradicated upon the appearance of utsaha, enthusiasm. So when enthusiasm comes, then inertia, jadya, inactivity, laziness, they become eradicated when utsaha comes. The word jarata means inertness. Actually, this word jarata pertains to the state that is the opposite of spiritual nature. So, in the Bengali language, jara is referring to this dull matter. Jara jagrata, dull matter. So here he's saying this inertness, to be inert, what is that pertaining to? It's pertaining to the state that is the opposite of the spiritual nature. Because the spiritual nature is what? Full consciousness, activity. But the gross material energy, all of that is inert, not conscious. So that is the opposite. That is the opposite of Chit Shakti. Maya Shakti is inert. So, how then is it possible to perform bhajan if inertness is given a place in the body or in the heart? Inertness is given a place in the body or in the heart. So, in the absence of effort, apathy arises. Apathy, apathetic. The practice of bhakti yoga should be performed with a consciousness that is free of indifference. Here Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 23 instructs, Tam vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga samyatam sanishchayena yoktavyo yoga nirvinna cetasa. Here Krishna is telling, know that state of samadhi to be devoid of any contact with the duality of mundane happiness and misery. Again, know that state of samadhi to be devoid of any contact with the duality of mundane happiness and misery. This yoga should be performed with firm determination and undeviating consciousness. This yoga should be performed with firm determination and undeviating consciousness. So in his commentary on this verse, Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan Mahashai has said, Atmanya yogatva mananam nirvedas tad rahitena cetasa. Means, if a person considers himself unqualified to perform an activity, then he becomes disinterested in that activity. So if someone thinks, well, I'm not qualified to perform that activity, then they become disinterested, apathetic, right? Disinterested. So, remaining completely free from this kind of disinterest, one should practice bhakti yoga with enthusiasm. So regarding bhakti yoga, Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto 20th chapter, verse 7 and 8 has mentioned. And so again, so many verses from 11th canto, and especially from this chapter, the 20th chapter, 11th canto, Lord Krishna speaking to Uddhava. So regarding bhakti yoga, it is mentioned, Nirvinnanam jnana yogo Nyasinam iha karmasu Teshvan nirvinna chittanam karma yogas tu kaminam Yadrichaya matkatado jata shraddhastu yakpuman na nirvinno nati shakto bhakti yogosya siddhida. This is the second verse, very often quoted verse. So Krishna is telling Uddhava, O Uddhava, those who have become detached from karma and its fruits, and who have completely renounced both, are eligible to perform jnana yoga. So, to go from the level of karma, one has to become detached from karma and the fruits. And they've completely renounced both. Now they're eligible to perform jnana yoga. So inversely, persons are eligible for karma yoga as long as their heart has not yet developed renunciation toward karma and its fruits, and as long as they are desirous of the fruits of action, but they do not lament it. So both ways. Both ways. Eligibility is coming when someone becomes detached from karma and its fruits, and they give it up, they renounce that. Now they become eligible for jnana yoga. But the other way around, inversely, persons are eligible for karma yoga. What about that? First, it's talking about those who are eligible to give up karma. But the persons who are eligible for karma yoga, as long as their heart has not yet developed renunciation toward karma and its fruits, and as long as they are desirous of the fruits of action, but they do not lament it. So that means they're eligible for karma. They desire the fruits of action, but they don't lament it. Now, yadrichaya mat katado, now comes a much higher level. He's telling those who are neither, na nirvinno nati shakto, those who are neither too detached nor too attached, and who, by the fortune of having performed auspicious acts in previous lives, they have developed faith in the narrations of my pastimes. They are qualified to perform bhakti yoga, through which they can attain perfection. So, that happened to us, didn't it? Us four old God brothers sitting here. At one point in our lives, that happened to us. What happened?
We heard the pastimes and developed faith in them. And then to that degree, we were able to perform bhakti yoga.
Yeah, but why? Here it says.
We're not attached or detached.
And why is that? By good fortune of having performed auspicious acts in previous lives. We didn't have to go through the karma yoga and the jnana yoga. No. Why? Because yadrichaya matkatado jata shraddhas. Jata shraddha means shraddha has awakened. In what? Matkatado, Krishna's, my kata. That has awakened. Because of actions performed in previous lives. So, what happened? They developed shraddha, faith in the narrations of Krishna's pastimes. So they are qualified to perform bhakti yoga, through which they can attain perfection. So somehow or other, we floated up on the shore of the ocean of the pure devotee's lotus feet. And we got the opportunity to hear. There are so many persons who also came in contact, but they didn't stay. Why did we stay? Because of previous lives already. And jata shraddha. Jata means awakened. Shraddha awakened in us. And in my case, I very vividly remember that from the very first day that I came into the temple room, there was the Krishna book sitting there on one of those Indian, what are they called? Book stand. And I was just looking, going through the pictures. And it just so happened that that Krishna book had come very recently, you know. I don't know.
The silver ones, right?
What?
The big silver ones?
Yeah, the big ones. Yeah. It had just come to the temple, and therefore every single day when we went in the Sankirtan van out for Sankirtan, a devotee read to all the devotees crowded in the back of the big maxi van, Dodge maxi van, right? And then when we came back, they also read. So we were hearing the pastimes of Krishna right from the very beginning. And of course we were having Srimad Bhagavatam class for the first canto, the old books of Prabhupada that he brought with him. Those were the ones we were reading. And then in the evening, Bhagavad Gita. We didn't even have the full volume yet with all the purports. We had the abridged version. We had to wait a long time for that unabridged version, do you remember? We had to wait until like 1974, I think it was. And this was back in 1970. They even printed more versions of the abridged version. When that contract with Macmillan ran out, then they printed, ISKCON BBT printed that one that had the kind of like an interesting, border around it, and Krishna and Arjuna on the chariot. Anyway, I don't know if you remember, but I remember because we formed a party traveling across the country from California to Florida and other states, and we were called, it was like Dear Krishna, actually. He arranged this with Ramaswar, that we would be called the Bhagavad Gita College Campus Distribution Party, something like that. And you know what technique we used at that time? Put on our wigs, dressed with a shirt, like short sleeve shirt and a tie, with our clipboard. Excuse me, sir. We're doing a survey. So they had printed like 1 million copies of that Bhagavad Gita. It still wasn't the unabridged version. So then, we distributed quite a few of those. That was the objective. So the thing is that we were hearing the Krishna book, and then we were also hearing it. Like when we took prasadam, somebody would be reading it. Then in the evening when we were having milk prasadam, someone would be reading it. And then after 2 months, I was sent to Chicago. After 2 months in Detroit, we had moved into this big, beautiful place. And now I'm sent to Chicago by Bhagavan. We were in this tiny little storefront, only like 4 or 5 devotees, right? But we had 4 classes a day. We had the Bhagavatam in the morning, then teaching of Lord Chaitanya, I think. After, a little bit later, like we did some cleaning of the temple, then we sat down teaching of Lord Chaitanya. Then in the evening then in the midday when we came back for lunch from doing the Sankirtan on the streets, Harinam Sankirtan, took the train there and back, then we had a lunch. And then we read Krishna book after lunch until we kind of nodded off, and then, okay, time to go again. And then we would get back in the evening at 5 o'clock. We would get on the train with all the people getting out of the offices and everything, come back to our little temple, and we would go upstairs immediately and shower. And then we would come back down to the little temple room with the little Jagannath deities, and then we would have Nectar of Devotion class. Then we would have Artik, and then we would have Bhagavad Gita class after that. And then at night, with the milk prasadam, then we heard Krishna book. So we were hearing Nectar of Devotion, Krishna book, all of this. And I think a lot of the, devotees had so much opportunity like that, even reading it on our own, So this was a kind of special dispensation that we were able to be so much favorably situated to become absorbed directly in all these very high conceptions. Yeah, So here's the thing, that those who are neither too detached nor too attached, and who, by the fortune of having performed auspicious acts in previous lives, they have developed faith in narrations of my pastimes, they are qualified to perform bhakti yoga, through which they can attain perfection. Bhakti yogosya siddhida. Siddhida means giving siddhi, giving perfection. Bhakti yoga. So now he is explaining different types of spiritual practices. Jnana yoga, karma yoga, and bhakti yoga. We've heard this a lot, haven't we? There are three types of spiritual practitioners in accordance with different states of consciousness. Number one, those who possess a consciousness of nirvinna, indifference. So he's already mentioned how indifference is not favorable, right? But yet, there are three types of spiritual practitioners in accordance with their different states of consciousness. So the first type, those who possess a consciousness of indifference, nirvinna. The second type, those whose consciousness is devoid of detachment, anirvinna. And three, those whose consciousness is free from attachments, nirved. Then he says yoga is also three types. Now here is the first time that he's mentioning the word yoga in relation to jnana yoga, karma yoga, and bhakti yoga. Now it's no longer, he's not discussing just karma, but karma yoga, or jnana, but jnana yoga. So, yeah.
I don't understand how a spiritual practitioner can possess a consciousness of indifference.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to find out now. Okay. So he's first explaining jnana yoga. It is beneficial for persons whose consciousness is filled with indifference, nirvinna. That is, those who are unattached to karma and its results. So they're nirvinna, they're unattached to karma. Then persons whose consciousness is devoid of detachment, anirvinna, that is, those who possess many desires, they're eligible to perform karma yoga. That's why they're spiritual practitioners, because the word yoga is there. And those who are not yet detached, anirvinna, and also those whose consciousness is free from attachment, nirved, they become eligible for bhakti yoga when, on the strength of their good fortune, faith arises in their hearts for hearing narrations of Sri Krishna's pastimes. They can be both anirvinna and nirved. They can be indifferent and also detached. So, the purport is this. But for dry renunciation, what else can reside in the heart of those who have become free from the desire to perform material activities, but have been unable to gain any experience of transcendental activities which are beyond materiality? Only dry renunciation can reside in their heart.
Thorny thickets of Gyan, it's called Jnana Dharma. Thorny thickets.
Thorny thickets, yeah. Yeah. Because they've become free from the desire to perform material activities, but they've been unable to gain any experience of transcendental activities which are beyond materiality. So the topmost attainment of such persons is knowledge, Gyan, of non-dual Brahma. So we can use the example of Sannyasi Thakur in the first chapter of Jaiva Dharma. And he really, really understood, because he was very knowledgeable. He had studied all the Shastras, everything. But when he saw that Vaishnava in Varanasi, he became like, beside himself. What is it? Because he's already very on a very detached, pure condition, and really that's what he's looking for, but he hasn't found ecstasy, only dry renunciation and gyan. But when he saw that Vaishnava who had ecstatic symptoms on the bank of the Ganga there, Ganga Yamuna, then he became overwhelmed. He became completely, like, what's the word? So attracted. And then he began to search, which eventually led him to Navadvip Dham.
He experienced some bliss there by seeing.
Yes, he did, indirectly, but he wanted more of that because he's experiencing that, and him just seeing that, he was aroused.
At that time, he was attached to his rank as a but, and so he couldn't let go of that to go, but he was building up.
Right? Yeah. So, the purport is this. Well, we just read that. For those who are neither detached from material activities, nor realized in transcendental activities, which are beyond materiality, there is no other way than to perform karma yoga, which purifies the consciousness. So we see, there's no other way for them, not yet, because they're not detached from material activities. They have no realization of transcendental activities. They don't understand that transcendental activities are beyond materiality. So for such persons, they're not eligible. There's no other way than to perform karma yoga, which purifies the consciousness. Those who have understood the utter insignificance of material activities, having attained realization of spiritual activities, they are indifferent to all kinds of material activities. So they've attained some realization of spiritual activities, and they've understood how material activities are so utterly insignificant, but still they accept performing a limited amount of prescribed action meant only to aid in their spiritual awakening, but they remain unattached to those activities. I'm going to read that sentence again. So they've attained realization of spiritual activities, and they're completely indifferent to all kinds of material activities. But still, they accept performing a limited amount of prescribed action meant only to aid in their spiritual awakening, but they remain unattached to those activities.
It's like taking care of the body, but without attachment, for instance.
Yeah, but he's telling here that they're doing these prescribed actions. They have some spiritual realization, and they understand, they accept to perform these prescribed actions meant to aid in their spiritual awakening, but only a limited amount. And they remain unattached to those activities. But in bhakti, one becomes free from attachment to material sense objects to the extent that one deliberates on and discusses spiritual subject matters. Freedom from attachment to material sense objects is but a byproduct of bhakti. The symptoms of bhakti yogis are mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, same chapter, 20, verse 27 and 28, as follows. Jata shradho madkatasu, the same verse. Nirvinna sarva karmasu, veda dukatmakan kaman prityage pyanishvara. We in a previous chapter read that. So we've come to the end of the time for this evening. But it's very interesting how Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he is laying the foundation so that we can practice bhajan. Yes, that's all coming in relation to enthusiasm. So we're going to really hear a lot of nectar on this topic tomorrow. Yes. So, Shri Videshamritam ki jai, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur ki jai, Shri Rupa Goswami Pada ki jai, Shri Rupa Nuga Guru Varga ki jai, Sachinandana Gaura Hari ki jai, Gaur Premanandi. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All glory to the Son of the Devotee.